Hi, this is Jordan.
And I'm Bryan, and you're listening to The Quality Varies.
Jordan.
Hey, Bryan.
How are you?
I am peachy. I'm a little bit less stressed than last time. My busy weekend got over with. Bryan, my bike is gone.
It's funny that you bring that up, actually.
Is your bike gone?
It is no longer on the street.
That, I don't think, is what is the answer that I was expecting and that Maddie wants.
No. So, today, actually, I was at work, and two police officers knock on my front door, and one of my kids answers, and so my wife goes up to the door, and there's two police officers standing there, and her first thought was, oh no, did Bryan die?
Yeah. Not a good way to start the day. What time was this? Was this in the morning?
No, this was in the... no, it was. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, not a good way to start the day.
Nope. And so she, like, hardcore panicking for, like, a full second, and then they just started asking about the motorcycle that was parked on the street. And they're like, hey, we noticed that the motorcycle is not registered. And if a vehicle is inoperable for any reason, it can't spend more than, like, 96 hours on the public road. It can sit on your driveway if that's fine, but it can't be on the public road while it's inoperable. And so she was like, oh, okay. And so she just moved it up into our driveway.
Does she like riding?
I've taken her on a couple of rides on the Buell, and she's actually asked about taking it out on, like, date nights every now and then. Unfortunately, the Ducati doesn't have a back seat.
Doesn't do that.
Yeah, so that's a no-go, but...
My impression of her attitude on the bikes was incorrect. I thought she was not a fan of them for some reason.
Yeah, she doesn't love them, but she does like that I like them a lot, and everybody is on board for the price.
True.
Yeah, I mean, the gas mileage alone is just silly.
Yeah.
I've gassed up one time in like a month and a half, and it cost me under $12.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's hard. And plus you live in St. George, so your seasons last a little bit longer that you can bike in.
Yeah.
Than a lot of other places.
Right.
Is there really any stretch of time that you consistently can't really ride in the past years?
When I lived down here before I moved to Salt Lake, I rode year-round.
Okay.
While my bike was, not dead.
Yeah, I didn't ride it at all while I was down there.
Right. Yeah, it was in the shop for almost 2 years, over 2 years, almost 3 years.
I just say your patience, and I understand the situation. There was more to it than just the bike was getting fixed, but your patience on that far exceeds anything. I haven't even had my history with motorcycles in its totality is less than 2 years. And I've gone through 3 bikes.
Yeah. Holy crap, man. Yeah, there was some situations going on there, and it turned out to not be a huge deal. It was rough. But yeah, while the bikes were in working order, 12 months year-round was riding season for me. So I just need a big leather jacket for like December and January, really.
Yeah, you need a big leather jacket for multiple reasons.
Mostly just the wind.
You gotta put on the whole biker look.
I'm not into that, man. I'm like not into it. I'm down for shorts and if my wife doesn't know, a not helmet.
That's not. Oh gosh.
I would be super down for just shorts, flip flops, and a backwards hat and sunglasses. Like that is just like super good, comfortable riding gear.
Hypothetically, of course.
Absolutely, hypothetically.
Yes. Does Utah have any laws around helmets?
Nope.
No, okay.
Nope,
Yeah,
'cause
Washington does.
Oh, yeah, well, Utah likes this thing called freedom, but we won't get into that.
Okay. Yeah, Brian, this episode is not starting off in the way that I desired. I obviously had expectations going into this that are already being proven wrong.
That's right. We'll drop that subject real quick.
No. I gotta go over the sale of my bike.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about you selling your bike.
So I was having a lot of like shame and self-conscious attitudes around this sale happening because I put it up on the market once. I listed it for $2,500, knowing that it was not worth that much.
Right.
I was back in June, if I'm remembering correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I got offer. I think the highest one was around 1,800.
Yeah.
At the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mostly didn't take that out of principle because the guy that was at the tail end of a guy making me hold the bike for a week, asked me to lower the price. So just out of principle, I was like, no, I will not. So I got cold feet. I liked the bike and I was like, I'll just sell the bike later. I'll just get a couple more months of riding. Rode it, like loved it for another 3 weeks. And then the heat wave happened the day after. The heat wave in the Northwest, or I don't know if you guys really experienced it too much where you guys were at, but our 118 degree weather here in Southeast Washington happened the day after I killed my battery.
Oof.
And so the mental exhaustion of thinking about trying to deal with a couple problems at once is too much for me. So I let the bike sit for 3 weeks in the heat.
Oh.
And then when I turned it back on, the carburetor was like, what's going on?
Yeah, that can happen.
So the carburetor needs a deep cleaning, and I never had an intention on taking it in my move that is coming up. We're not talking about that too much on the show yet. I don't think it's ever been discussed yet, but we'll get around to it.
We'll get there.
Maybe in the next month or so.
Yeah, nothing big, just a almost cross-country move.
Anyways, I never had any intention of taking the bike with me. So I got to list it again. This time I listed it for like $1,200. The Facebook is not a mentally healthy place for many reasons.
That's why I don't get on there.
I go through spurts of like every 6 months. I have a reason to be on Facebook.
Yeah.
It's not really... Messenger is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Messenger's great.
I thought they were fools and idiots. When they first initially separated Messenger away from Facebook.
Yeah.
One of the smarter things that they've done as far as its effect on me.
Oh, yeah.
I use Messenger on a daily basis, but Facebook is not the best thing that the world has ever received as far as gifts. I download this to put it on the Facebook Marketplace, and I start getting these messages from some intellectuals here in Southeast Washington.
I'm biting my tongue.
What is your best guess on some of the first offers that I got?
I don't know. Did somebody offer you like $500 for it?
I had 3 people within the first day just message me saying $350.
What?
Like
$1,200,
bro.
$1,200? Hey, $350. Come on.
Not 5 days prior did I walk into a bike shop and I sold my pedal bike for $500.
Good gravy.
I'm not giving you... Like, this thing can go... My pedal bike can go like 20 miles an hour. My motorcycle can go 120 miles an hour. I'm not giving it to you for less than what I just sold my pedal bike for.
$350, bro? Come on.
But just nothing was happening. No traction. And I'm sitting here putting this on myself because I am a salesman. I hated salesmen all my life.
There's that identity.
Yes, thank you. Family members were salesmen. Didn't like it.
Yep.
Avoided sales for my whole life. And then houses came around. I was like, ooh. And now I do sales.
Yeah.
I think that I am okay at it. But based on the first week of this bike being listed, I would say I'm pretty trash. And
gotta love that.
Didn't think I was going from like I listed at 1,200. Thought that it was going to be easy. A couple days later, I'm like, okay, minimum of 1,000. And then by the end, like I messaged the guy back. Luckily, he didn't reply to me quickly enough because I was going to accept his $800 offer.
Man.
And if that didn't work out, I was just going to bite the bullet on the bike, and I was going to sell it for I was going to sell it to a buddy and let that bike be his first bike and let him learn and just, take the emotional satisfaction that at least I'm doing something nice.
Right.
And I was going to give it to him for $500.
Oh.
Luckily, if only my laziness and that other person not reaching back out to me, somebody did reach out and we met kind of that same night. Mm-hmm. And I was very taken back because I bought it from a gal that her and her family, they restored cars for as a hobby. So the gal that I bought the bike from, I showed up at her house and there was just it looked like a parking lot of just beautiful cars.
Yeah. Oh.
And this bike, they had replaced the tank, and then the whole bike. You've seen the photo of it. It's a I don't know if it's a pearl white or a Cadillac white.
Yeah.
But beautiful, custom,
pretty bike.
And when I walked out to meet them, I was scrambling around in my bedroom trying to look for the title, and they were outside. It was out in the driveway, so they were already taking a look at it. It was the doppelganger. I thought that the same gal had just, for some reason, wanted her bike back and had come to buy it again. And so it took me several minutes to establish that this was not the same woman. She came out and she's rode dirt bikes all her life. But she's started to get into sport bikes and cruisers and all that.
Yeah.
She has a family member that's very familiar with bike maintenance. And so it's not going to cost her anything to clean the carburetor and do everything that's needed to get it fully functioning. So
that's nice.
Yeah, so that family member took it around the block, was totally comfortable with it, made me slightly less confident. You're going to not like what I'm about to say. But he asked me about the choke. And I said, yeah, you push the choke that way to turn on the choke, or whatever the technical term is for the choke on the motorcycle.
Okay.
And he looks at me and he says, "Are you sure?"
Oh, no.
And I said, I mean, my heart's pumping right now, but I swear that the motorcycle shop pointed at this thing and pointed upwards and told me to push it away from me to turn the choke on.
Oh, man.
And he just gives me this look, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Is my whole life a lie?
The way you've been choking your motorcycle certainly is.
So we're gonna quickly move on from that because I am deeply uncomfortable with the implications.
Isn't there a picture right there?
No.
There should be a picture.
It had been worn off.
No.
There was an arrow that once he explained his reasoning to me, it did look like the arrow may have been pointing down, but we don't need to get into that.
Jordan.
We don't need to get into that.
That's all right. Well, I mean, to be fair, you're pretty new with bikes. I'll give you that. And being new, receiving advice from a mechanic who's supposed to know better, that's a raw deal, man.
Yeah, and I still, as I explain this, I'm still more than 50% sure that I am correct. I'm not saying that, I still think that I am on the right side of this because I do remember the mechanic when they cleaned my carburetor having this interaction with them.
Yeah.
But there's a seed of doubt.
Yeah,
the seed is blooming.
Yeah, the chokes, they come towards you to choke the carburetor. I mean, at least that's how it's been on mine. But,
well,
I don't know.
In that case, probably the carburetor probably didn't need as much of a cleaning as I thought it did.
Probably. That also means you were riding with a good amount less power, I think.
Oh, we don't need to...
Sorry to burst your bubble there, buddy. Let's change topics here. How are you doing with the old Murph challenge? Hashtag Jordan's first Murph challenge.
Man, Bryan, we're just going to go from one good topic to another.
Great topic.
My fitness is going great.
That's good.
I would not say that my workouts on a daily basis are being tailored exactly towards Murph challenge activities. But when is that challenge, by the way?
Next month.
What's the date?
November 11th, yeah.
Okay. That's going to be a very interesting date.
It'll be fine. You'll be fine.
That will be the day that I am driving out of state.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's okay. It just gives me more of a reason to go sign up for a gym when I arrive.
Yeah, exactly. The moment you arrive.
Just not even get to my new place.
Nope, just drive the moving truck straight to the gym. Hello, I would like to work out here.
Park and take up 8 disabled parking spots. Hello, it is I.
I would like to purchase a membership, please.
The faster you sign me up, the faster I free up those disabled parking spots. No, if there's my time working at the gym, if there's anything that gets handled very quickly, is those, and this is not a bad thing. I'm totally down for it, but those volunteer like enforcement officers, those like retired folks that just drive around in the car and they just live to make sure that non-disabled people are not taking up disabled parking spots.
Yeah.
Their response time may be faster than an ambulance. Like, some Jeep rolls up and it doesn't have any tags or anything, doesn't have the permanent or temporary tags. Mm-hmm. Like, those guys are on them before that guy even steps down.
Dang.
Yeah, just they're amazing. I had all my stuff. You challenged me at just an extremely opportune time when I was trying to lose weight, and you told me to do all this functional training stuff. Mm-hmm. I lost the weight. I met all the goals that I was wanting to.
Sweet.
And then that gave me about a month and a half to start working on the functional training. Mm-hmm. Started doing the strength training. Me and an old coworker of mine that still trains at the gym connected again, and he's training me all the way up until I leave. And he asked me, he says, "Are you going for the Murph Challenge to like do all the things, or do you have another purpose?" I said, "Well, in reality, I just have this massive ego, and I just want to look amazing when I have to take a certain couple of business photos in about a month." And he said, "Okay, so you don't care about the Murph Challenge, you just want to look bombing." And I said, "Yes, I would like to look bombing."
Who doesn't?
That's what's going on right now.
Yeah.
It's tailored towards the Murph Challenge, but not a lot is happening on that specific end. And I also cry inside every time I look at how many pull-ups. I really don't care about any of the other metrics, and so that's how that's going. How's it going for you?
Good. It's going good. I got a pair of very nice running shoes for my birthday.
Ooh.
And so running is coming along swimmingly.
Nice.
I didn't do this last time, but I started doing the before and after runs for my workouts. I only did that like maybe twice before I did the whole challenge last year.
Yeah.
But I've started to do that more frequently for each workout.
The
nice.
after run is a killer.
Dude, have you done like the 100 plus squats and then run a mile?
Yeah, I've done the 100, like the sets of 35.
Yeah.
And then gone and done it. Yeah, that is. I don't know if the movements I was making would be called running.
Yeah, right.
It's more kind of like a
semi-controlled. Yeah, it's like a semi-controlled fall forward.
Yeah, like a swift penguin.
Yeah,
is just booking it.
Yeah. All those squats, especially the first time I did an after run, my butt and hamstrings just felt like rubber. Yeah. They're just like bouncing around. It was an interesting experience.
Cardio in general, as I'm like reteaching myself, so like a lot of this fitness related stuff, I'd forgotten how much cardio changes if you do it at the end of a workout.
Oh yeah.
Here I am thinking like, oh, I can, like I'm hitting miles at around like the 11 minute mark, pretty consistently, and then after the workout I go and do it, and I'm thinking I'm gonna hit 11 minutes, and then about halfway through I'm like, I don't know how I ever hit this time ever.
It's a very different experience.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I'm good. I will do the Murph Challenge on the 11th, and it will be a fantastic time.
It'll be great.
Indeed. What's oh my goodness, we already took up 25 minutes. Bryan, what's our actual topic today?
Our actual topic is one that we've been really excited about, I think. And I know at least one listener is actually excited to hear this episode.
Well, they may have stopped listening by now.
That's exciting. She's fine. She'll be here.
All right.
It's my sister.
You don't have to. We have listeners that are not our family members. We don't have to disclose.
So this one is kind of going to build on our identity episode. So if you haven't listened to the identity episode, or if it's been a while since you've listened to it, I recommend going and listening to that one. Pause this one right now and go back and listen to the identity episode. And we're going to kind of pick up from there and talk about something else called ego.
So the identity episode is episode 11. For those that are interested in going and watching that. And then you can come back here.
Yes, please watch our podcast.
You know, the podcast is on YouTube. I just got to get it out there.
Riveting television.
You know what?
I'm sure.
Bryan, have you ever seen the YouTube videos?
I haven't, actually.
Okay, well, you don't know what I put on there.
I guess you're right. You're right. So you
now I'm gonna have to put something on there for this one so that it looks interesting.
Very good.
What do you have for me, Bryan?
Well, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that you have I think you said massive ego. I think I'm quoting you correctly. What does that mean?
Well, I did my best to formulate a definition before doing any kind of looking into anything. And my definition of ego is that I wrote down is basically that I am the center stage and I am the center of the world. Like that is kind of what, when I think of ego, that's kind of what I have in my head, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That does sound like you have a massive ego.
That's the definition of ego in general.
I mean, that sounds like a definition from somebody who has a big ego. Just saying. Just some feedback.
Oh man, you know, when I started this podcast, I'm just kidding.
Interesting. What does it mean to be in the center stage, the center of the world, to you?
Yes, something I heard a while ago that really made sense in my head was the analogy that, like, for ego, or maybe they were using it for a different description, but I'll attach it to ego. But when I think about myself, like I'm in a theater or a show or a movie, like I'm the main character, and like there's depth to me, and I got stuff going on, and everybody else around me is a side character with very little, or maybe just one trait, you know, describing them. And that's why I say, like, kind of the center stage mindset. It's like I'm the main character and everybody else is a side character.
Gotcha. So
that's what when I hear the word ego, that's what pops up. If that gives you a kind of a clear idea on where I come from.
Yeah. So in this movie or play, are you watching a movie, or are you on the stage or in front of the camera?
I think I know where you're going with this, and I am already like feeling the mental fatigue of like but when I think of ego, or let's say like I'm the one with the ego in that moment, I am the main character.
Okay. So you're on stage performing
Yes.
the play. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a really good definition. Now, I want to be clear, the ego is separate from the identity. We talked a lot about identity and all of the things that we attach to ourselves, all of the labels that we identify with and glom onto and are attracted to, and we hold on to identities, and we can change those around, and we're putting stuff in our bowls and taking stuff out of our bowls, and that doesn't really have an effect on who we really are. That's kind of the Reader's Digest breakdown of our identity episode. But the ego is different. Like you said, it's not something that you choose or form yourself. It's the like actor, to use your analogy, the main character. To kind of build on that, if you can imagine the ego as separate from yourself, So maybe try putting the ego in that identity bowl. Does that make sense?
Are you saying like the ego is an unconscious thing? Or
No,
the
no,
ego
no.
is part of?
The ego is a very conscious thing. In fact, the ego is kind of the conscious mind in a way. So I wrote down.
Do you have a? Oh yeah. So what is your definition that you've done? You knew about ego a little bit because of your work, and like your study is kind of in this. Your study is about the mind in its totality,
Right.
and you did a bit of research before even kind of coming to a conclusion on a definition. So what did you write down?
So my definition that I wrote down here is the ego is the conscious mind's perception of the self, which does kind of go along with your definition of being the actor, right? So
Yeah.
the ego is the observer of your life. And like you said, you are in the play, you're in the movie, you're observing everything that's happening. And everything in your life is happening centered on you. And that's the ego's perception. And that's the ego's job, is to perceive everything. And
So
and
the
it has,
ego is like my perception from my vantage point.
it's your conscious mind's perception
From my vantage point.
right.
Okay.
Kind of. But yes. So think of a boat. Think of a ship. On a ship, you've got radar, right?
Yeah.
And the radar's job is to scan for disturbances, for trouble. The radar's there to detect threats and allows the crew of the ship to either avoid or engage the threats.
Okay.
That's basically the ego. That's basically the ego.
Now, if I think about a ship and I think immediately how I would like to be the captain of that ship, would that be considered egotistical?
In a different sense of the word, yeah, maybe.
All right, you may go on with your analogy. So that radar is the ego. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. The ego's job is to see and detect. And I know you and I have talked about this before. The ego protects us, right? And it, especially enlarged egos, are there to protect our vulnerabilities.
So to kind of separate this from kind of the maybe what the perception is from the a common person, or if the word has been misused frequently, maybe how it's been misused. What would you say the difference is between what ego actually is versus maybe how people use it on a daily basis when they say somebody's got an ego?
Right.
What do you feel like the difference is there, so people can get an understanding on what we're talking about?
Gotcha. Yes. So we're talking. So you and I, we've laid down a more philosophical definition for ego. The kind of the character traits that people associate with ego, such as arrogance or excessive confidence, those kind of go back to Freudian psychology. Good old Papa Freud. One of his later theories was the id, the ego, and the superego.
Okay. I'm not familiar with this. Are you able to expand on that a little bit?
For sure. So this was influenced by Sigmund Freud's student Carl Rogers. And Freud is he's known as the father of modern psychology. Carl Rogers is known as the father of humanism or humanistic psychology. It's interesting to study the id, the ego, and the superego, because it is kind of a shift from Freud's earlier theories, which have been criticized heavily.
Okay.
Anyway,
for being wrong, or for being just
disturbing.
out there.
Yeah. They're kind of disturbing.
Gotcha.
I've written papers on it. I've defended his earlier stuff. It's, if you think really hard about it, it can make sense, but Yeah, it's his early Freud's early model of human development is kind of weird. And anyway, he had
But his
this
later
student-
works are more accepted.
Yes, and absolutely, Freud invented psychoanalysis. Basically, he definitely brought that into the forefront of therapy and treatment. Mental health treatment. That's still something that he deserves credit for, I think. But anyway, the id, the ego, and the superego are kind of three levels of the mind. The id is the very base level of consciousness. The carnal drives of like food, sex, sleep.
Yeah.
The id is responsible for all of like the desires and passions of the human experience.
Okay.
And the ego comes online later in life, after we're a little more socialized, and the ego can kind of come down and regulate the id and say, well, yeah, like we want to eat this whole box of Twinkies. The ego will come in and regulate the id and say, yeah, we want to eat this whole box of Twinkies, but that's not really good for us, so let's not. And then the superego is like the step above, like the higher consciousness. You can kind of think of it as like the top of Maslow's pyramid of needs, like the self-actualized, like transcendent morality phase of consciousness, where we want to eat this whole box of Twinkies, but it would be more fulfilling and better for our whatever our community is to share them. The superego kind of follows the kind of higher morality in that sense, and so like.
Do you like Twinkies?
They're all right. I mean,
I hate 'em.
I've got a massive sweet tooth, so anything with.
I hate them. I think they're disgusting.
Really? Yeah, I mean, like flavor-wise, I'd rather have something else, but anything with sufficient amounts of sugar, I will eat with no problem.
Hot take: did not have a Twinkie until I was older than 20 years old.
That's not really a hot take. That's more of a fact. I think the hot take would be that you don't like them, and I don't think that's really a hot take. Moving on. So the kind of colloquial definition of ego is kind of tied to that Freudian definition of like the haughtiness of like the superego, kind of like, oh well, we're above eating a whole box of Twinkies, or we're above whatever is socially acceptable, right? That's kind of where that
started as far as the current attitude of an ego is that overconfident, self-absorbed kind of mindset.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's much different than how it's actually going for us when ego is part of our lives.
As far as the definitions are concerned, yes, they're different. Freud's definition of ego is kind of the foundation, just like everything Freud said is kind of the foundation for what we study today. Our definition of ego has evolved since Freud, and so there are differences, yes. So, like I said, ego's kind of taken on more of a philosophical meaning since then, and we can get into that in a minute. Because actually, you touched on something really deep in your definition that I want to come back to.
Okay.
So the ego's like the radar on a ship, right? It scans the environment, and the ego looks for threats to us. And like I mentioned before, its primary purpose is to protect our vulnerable parts.
So, hearkening back to kind of how we've approached some of the previous episodes, similar to this, it sounds like there's nothing inherently unhealthy or unnatural about ego,
right,
in the way that you're describing it.
Absolutely not. The ego, okay. Yeah, absolutely not. The ego, like I said, it's there to protect us. It's like a barrier or a guardian for us. It's is supposed to help us. Sometimes, well, a lot of times, we don't really understand that the ego is part of our mortal mind.
Yeah.
It's a function of mortality. It's not really who we are. Like, the ego is this internal observer from our physical body.
So because I mean, even just hearing that's probably news to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Ego, as it is in our lives, is not inherently an unhealthy thing. It is something that is fundamental to us. The thing that I had seen, and I had done a little bit of research on my end, and you had sent me just a thick with information video that was hard to put my hands around. But the thing that I remember him saying was that ego is like the sense of self that is conscious and that we are aware of. It's the decision making part of us.
Right.
That is what ego is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it makes those decisions, like the ego makes those decisions based on threats perceived, right?
Yeah.
So to give an example, let's say Billy thinks poorly of himself athletically.
Yeah.
So Billy's ego's job sees this this vulnerability within, what did I say his name was? Billy?
Billy. Billy also does not have a good memory.
Billy's ego sees that we aren't as good as Bobby at running, and so the ego steps in a low stakes situation. Billy's ego will say things like, I bet I'd beat Billy. I'd beat Bobby so easy in a race. It wouldn't even be a challenge, right? While they're inside, away from an open space to run in, right?
Yeah.
Because that will kind of cover up Billy's vulnerability of being slow, right?
It'll make him look more favorable.
Right. In a social situation.
Yeah.
And it does that, it seems counterintuitive, but it does that to protect Billy. Even though all it does is opens up Billy for more pain if somebody calls him out, if Bobby calls him out and challenges him to a race. Right?
Yeah.
Do you, off the top of your head, you can get as vulnerable as you like. Obviously, the more vulnerable, the better. But do you have an example in your own life where ego has kind of stepped in for your benefit or your detriment, either way? Can you think of anything?
I think maybe I'll share a story, and then you can maybe take those things and maybe give your input on what's going on, and if ego was present in it.
Sure.
I know when I was in high school, one of the more interesting moments was as a freshman who had just moved to the area, didn't know anybody. I ran for a class to be like a class vice president or class president.
Mm-hmm.
About midway, 3/4 of the way through the race, it was explained to me, because I didn't know how things worked. It was explained to me that I had signed up to run for the executive, like ASB, something not just for the class.
Mm-hmm.
And that involved a speech in front of the entire school.
Nice.
Yeah. And the person that was the adult that was over the ASB asked me, and in later years I suspect that he was asking me with the bias of like he wanted me to not follow through with it. But he asked me, he says, do you want to continue on with this, once we had established that there was this rift in communication as far as what I thought I was running for and what he thought he was running for, or what I was actually running for.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, I'll do it. And he said, well, a freshman can't run for president. A freshman can't run for president, but you can run for vice president. So I said, oh, okay, cool. I'll run for vice president. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I did not prepare a speech. We got up there, and then I stood up, and I just talked for my speech as a freshman in high school. For my speech, I just talked about my morning leading up to the speech. And the kids were at this boring thing, just found this to be the most entertaining thing in the world. that I was talking about my struggles with, like, man, I thought I was going to wear jeans today, and then, like, the dryer wasn't done, and it wasn't doing it for me, and I was just, like, the most monotonous of things, and I just took up my entire time slot talking about my normal morning routine.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thought it was hilarious. And I did super well in the race, and then a couple people that were also in the running disqualified themselves. I know one guy disqualified himself from the race. He said, "I'm not going to win, but you should vote for Jordan because he's got some balls," coming up here and talking about that. And so in my head, I'm like, I am the best public speaker there has ever been. And then maybe a couple months later, I was giving a talk at church, and maybe instead of trying to, connect spiritually with it and trying to pray about it and prepare it, in my head, I was like, well, no, I am the best public speaker on this earth. Like, literally, I can say anything. Probably the night before, thankfully, that I was still at the age in our church that a talk given in front of the congregation only had to be 2 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
Heaven forbid they had to listen to me for 10 minutes, but probably at 3 a.m. the morning prior, I hadn't gotten to bed yet. I just put down a bunch of bullets on this piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is good. I'm going to do great. Got up next day. Obviously, there was no spiritual attachment to the talk. Mm-hmm. There was no help from above, and it was just a train wreck. Mm. And then I went to the other end, and I was like, well, I am the worst public speaker in the world. And I avoided public speaking for a long time after that. So it kind of went from one end of one weird situation to like all the way to the other end because of one bad experience. But that's one memory that comes up to mind. Do you feel like that mindset of like that experience of like I'm the best there's ever been because of this anomaly? Do you feel like that is ego, or do you feel like that's something else?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe it doesn't fit exactly with the definition that the definitions we wrote down, but if we think about what the ego is and what its purpose is, absolutely. So the ego is internal observer in our conscious mind whose job is to protect us.
Yeah.
So you observed, or your ego observed, that you did a phenomenal job at your high school student body class presidency running speech.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to speak in church, you didn't say this, but I tell the story that you probably didn't want to put that much effort into writing a talk.
That may have also been involved.
So I think it would be pretty safe to say that your ego was trying to protect you from having to do something.
So that's super interesting. That's not even something I've thought of before. So you're saying you think my ego, unbeknownst to me, my conscious self, mm-hmm. my ego was protecting me in my fear of preparing a talk by having this attitude of I don't need to. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is fascinating. That is not at all the way that I've thought about it in the past, but I can totally see that being a thing. And I think I've heard that kind of thing being described in different ways in the past, not being attached to ego, but that totally makes sense to me, where on the back end, my subconscious self, or whatever level of consciousness mm-hmm. it was trying to make things work, or there was a pain there, in this case fear, right, that it wanted to cover up. And even though it wasn't to my benefit, that was the solution it came to. Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. And so then you observed that you're not that great of a speaker. Yeah. And so then your ego consciously protected you. Or I'm going to say your ego. I'm going to refer to your ego because we'll talk about the difference between you and your ego in a minute. Yeah. Your ego protected you from public speaking for a long time, right? Yeah. Steered clear of public speaking. Yeah, but I remember on top of that, or in addition to that, I remember it going even further that I would avoid public speaking, but I gave myself reasons for that, in that I would think like, oh, I'm good at it. I just get stressed, or I'm good at it, but these aren't like the situations that are, good for me. Mm-hmm. I was in a public speaking course at college, mm-hmm. and I dropped out because the instructor had a speech impediment.
Oh man.
And I was like, well, I'm a good public speaker, and I don't need this guy.
Right. Who
This is a
would?
terrible thing this this is a terrible thing to say, but I don't need this guy to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I think I do remember when I backed out of that class that behind that, I think there was some fear of public speaking, but there was a couple times that I recognized kind of covering that up, or I remember saying to myself, "Oh, I'm good at it, but I don't want to be egotistical.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let somebody else do it."
Right. Yeah. Man, egos are great at rationalizing, aren't they?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, egos are super duper good at rationalizing and coming up with excuses.
So what's parts of those times where ego stepped in, that was subconscious, maybe in the beginning with the church talk. Later on, there, I was a little bit more conscious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those were, different kind of iterations, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a good word to use, of ego playing a part in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's talk about the level of consciousness, the levels of consciousness at play here. There's a very fuzzy line between voluntary actions and involuntary actions. You watched the video where Alan Watts talked about the difference there.
Yeah, and we'll link there's a video that Bryan sent me, and I'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll make a little comment in the beginning maybe not. Maybe I'll just put it in the show notes, and I'll tell you guys right now to go watch that video.
Yeah. Go watch.
So you guys aren't spoiled.
Yeah. Go watch After School, the YouTube channel. They're great. They got all kinds of fantastic stuff. But so voluntary and involuntary, conscious and subconscious, there's not a real... It kind of fades in and out of each other, right? The ego is the conscious mind's perception of self. But you also have a subconscious back there that sometimes totally disagrees with that. So where's the difference? When you decide to do something, do you decide to do something? Or...
I know that's one of the big things that he says in the beginning of the video.
Yeah, and it's really... for me, very thought-provoking, because now I question how much my conscious mind, my ego, is doing things and how much my subconscious mind is doing things. Because I like to think that there's a significant difference between the two ends of the pendulum of the conscious ego and the subconscious mind. And I like to think that I'm fairly aware of the difference.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm not. And I'm sure there are a lot of times that I go unaware of that. But where do the decisions come from, right?
Yeah, is that kind of the main question when one is thinking about the ego?
Yeah. So is every action you take completely conscious?
And I would say for me, definitely not. And Alan Watts definitely brings it up himself, but some of those things, as far as... Well, I'll try to say a couple different things than what he says. Mm-hmm. There are several times throughout the day, especially now since I haven't been as intentional about it, but reaching for my phone and maybe automatically pulling up an app on my phone, even though I pulled that same app up not 5 minutes ago.
Right.
And looked through everything. On the same note, maybe people can relate to just checking the fridge. Mm-hmm. What's changed?
What's in the pantry?
Yeah,
is that box of Oreos that I really want to be there in there yet?
Yeah.
Nope. Dang it.
I mean, on the same note, checking email when I think of like a kid. Like as a kid, I always wanted mail. And as an adult, there's nothing I want less than mail. And it's definitely the same thing with like email. Is like when I was younger and I set up my first email, I'm like, all I want is email. And now as an adult, like I look at my inbox, and the lower the number is, the better my day is. Mm-hmm. But checking email becomes habitual, and maybe if I've already forgotten. We've either already talked about habit, or it's in the future, in my mind, but.
I think that one's in the future.
Okay. Well, habit is definitely another big thing that we could talk about. Yeah, those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah. So are those voluntary or involuntary? Or in other words, are you doing them or are they happening to you?
I would say they're happening to me. because
Yeah.
there's been times where I don't know, like I'll come to myself, or like I'll come to my senses, as people might say, and I'll just realize, hey, I'm looking at my phone and I'm checking GroupMe, or I'm checking a social media site,
Yeah.
and it's almost like I'm just realizing it, even though like I was the one that pulled my phone out and I'm
Right.
checking Facebook,
Yeah.
but it's like a surprise to me a couple seconds later.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say that it's happening to me.
Yeah. But you had to do it though, right?
Yeah, and that's when we start getting into like the different levels of
Yeah.
consciousness,
Yeah.
because
So like, what's the difference, right?
yeah, and I could see how that would be a gray line. Or like I know there's some people, Alan Watts talks about it as far as like driving, but like some people on their way to work, they'll just like get to work and they'll like suddenly like be like riveted in fear. They're because they can't remember ever stopping for a red light, and they think like, did I just run like 7 red lights?
Oh yeah.
And you
Yeah.
probably didn't, but it was just the drive was so habitual, and it just came and left. That's another big one as well, and I've definitely done that, where I've just like gotten to work, or I've gotten to the last intersection before work, and then I suddenly tense up, where I'm like, oh my goodness, how did I get here?
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly relate to that.
I don't do that as much on a motorcycle, but
Yeah, it is harder on a motorcycle for sure. But so there's the answer's basically yes. Like you obviously you have to do it because nobody's putting your phone and opening up Facebook for you. It's you doing it.
yeah,
But there's your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, and they're both different. They're separate, clearly, but they're both working separately but in tandem to each other.
yeah. Can I add one more example?
Yes.
This is very similar to the phone thing and pulling out your phone, but something that if I encourage people to, if you haven't noticed it yet, just the next time you're around a group of people, just look. The minute that people stop like talking, or that there's like a lull, look around and see how quickly the majority of the group of people pull their phones out.
Yeah. It's frightening.
It is frightening. And the habit, for yourself, like, oh, I'll pull my phone out. And I can definitely see where that is a great example of the ego. Maybe there's something trying to the ego's trying to cover up or put you in a more favorable light by pulling out your phone and make it seem like you're doing something, even though maybe that's all you're doing is you're just checking Facebook again for the third time that hour.
Right.
But yeah, just look around the group. Yeah, it's scary. Not a fan of it, but I'll do the same thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So there's different levels of consciousness. Do they have, is that the names that you were talking about before, as far as the id, the ego, and the superego?
Yeah, so we don't really call them that anymore. It's just
Okay.
we just kind of talk about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind.
Okay.
So you can think, and that's your conscious mind. Like all the thoughts you have happen in your conscious mind, and you're
Yeah.
aware of those. And your subconscious mind is like,
Well, you said like the subconscious mind is dealing with, from my time at rehab. I remember the conversation that the subconscious. You'll tell me if I'm connecting the right lesson to the right thing. But the subconscious mind is like the iceberg under the water level. Like
Yeah.
the conscious mind is the tip, but the subconscious mind is the actual like 80% of your mind,
right.
like doing the brunt of the work.
Yeah. Doing more work than the conscious mind.
Doing more volume.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Because at any point in time, when I'm walking down the hallway and I'm thinking about my meeting that I'm on my way to, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to say on that meeting. But in that moment, like I open 3 doors, I have a quick like pleasantries conversation with the receptionist. I avoid somebody's coffee that they're carrying. Like I'm walking.
Yeah.
I'm drinking. Like I have water in my hand. Like there's a billion things going on that the subconscious mind is taking care of.
Yes.
While I'm heading to a meeting and I'm thinking about how to not look like a fool in this meeting. And so there's a lot of like volume, just stuff that the subconscious mind is doing.
Yes. Yes. And there's these fascinating things called heuristics that your subconscious programs for itself. Think of heuristics like a macro on a computer. It's a shortcut. And so all this information comes in, right? You literally get in that walk down your hallway, your brain is processing terabytes of information.
Yeah.
Terabytes of information. I'm going to say that again. Terabytes of information. Like
For those that aren't the most techie,
astronomical amounts of data.
what is the tree to a terabyte for somebody that is unfamiliar with tech stuff?
I believe a terabyte is 100 gigabytes, correct?
It's 1,000.
1,000.
That's 1,024 to be exact. But 1,000
Yes.
1,000 gigabytes.
Yeah.
And to put it into perspective, I think you could put a gigabyte of storage can hold like several hundred, if not more, songs.
Mm-hmm.
If that like helps somebody visualize like how big a gigabyte is.
Mm-hmm.
And then 1,024 gigabytes is 1 terabyte.
And
So,
just because I
just-
did the math in my head while you were talking, that's 1.24 trillion bytes of data.
Yeah. And so that's just for people, if that helps somebody visualize, that is truly an insane amount of data.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we're getting into this. Computer technology is kind of built and designed based on our understanding of the brain and psychology.
Yeah.
So think of RAM, like the working memory of the
Oh,
computer.
I'm so excited on the direction that this conversation is taking.
It's just a quick dip, my friend. Don't get too excited.
No. You think it's a quick dip.
So RAM, right?
I'm putting this in future topics. I'm
Good.
putting that down right now.
That's actually, I think that'd be a really fascinating. I think that'd be a fun topic. So a big amount of RAM. That's like a lot of power. How much RAM on like a big, nice computer?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Let's say like the biggest video editor just cranking through just massive amounts of high-end simulations and video editing. An oversupply of RAM for them would probably be 128 gigabytes of RAM. And for 98% of the population, 8 gigabytes of RAM is more than enough for what anybody in the world needs.
Yeah. So the most like top end most amount of RAM that a computer can have is 128 gigabytes per.
The most that anybody would need. We can start getting into the whole of like servers and all
Okay,
that,
sure.
but-
All right. Sorry. We're out of my depth here in the
Alright.
computer tech. But and is that 128 gigs per second or per minute, or is it just kind of a flat? Is there a time?
So the I'll kind of explain it, and then you can tell me if it lines up.
Okay.
So it's like you can picture it as a room, and how big is the room, and however big the room is means that's how many people can shuffle in and out at the same time.
Okay.
So you can picture each Chrome tab is a person. How many Chrome tabs can be chilling
I see.
in the room? Yeah.
Okay, I see.
So it's not like moving in and out, just like how big is the space?
Okay.
So,
Sure.
Yeah, because RAM is the frontal part of like all the stuff that needs to like be available like right now.
Gotcha.
So does that kind of line up with kind of what's in your head?
Yeah. So your what we call the working memory, your conscious RAM is tiny. You can remember basically a phone number for
Was it like 7 seconds?
7 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, that's the number I remember hearing.
The magic number is 7 plus or minus 2.
Yeah.
You can remember like maybe 9 bits of data for 5 seconds, or like 7 bits of data for 7 seconds, or it's always 7 plus or minus 2.
Yeah.
And there's a fun paper to read on 7 plus or minus 2.
That sounds riveting.
I can't remember who wrote it, but one of the first psychologists who did a lot of work with working memory came up with that. But your subconscious RAM is where we're talking like terabytes of data. So every movement down that hallway outside of you is measured and tracked by your subconscious. Every door, any bumps in the carpet, the temperature, the wind that you feel on your face and ears as you're walking, the coffee, the everything, that's all measured by your and encoded by your subconscious. And then the really, really cool part that we don't really understand yet is how the subconscious tells your conscious there's a coffee cup right there. Move out of the way. And so you got these two separate clocks running in your brain. Yeah. Right? There's the conscious mind, the ego, that you're making decisions and you're talking and you're thinking and you're daydreaming. That's your ego, right? And then you got your subconscious, which is measuring everything in the physical world and feeding that information to your ego to make decisions based on. And not to mention your personality. Your personality heuristics are stored within your subconscious. And
not to sideline too much, but for anybody that's ever wondered, as far as advertising, like let's take like Coke. Like anybody that's ever wondered why Coke just seems to throw money at ads in the most random of ways, or just has their name like everywhere, and you think to yourself like, why would I, like, this doesn't do anything to me. Coke is, when they do those advertisements, they don't care about your conscious mind. They're literally just bombarding your unconscious mind just by sheer volume. Like how many times in a day can we make Bryan see our name and our brand and our logo? Because the next time that he goes and gets a drink, there's another word, and I don't know if it's something you and I talked about recently or if it's came up at a different space, but something familial. Like there are some choices that we make just purely based on how familiar we are with them. So Coke just wants us to be most familiar with Coke when we need to make a drink. So Coke does not care about the fact that you're mad when you see like the 17th Coke logo during your day.
Actually, they're quite happy if you get mad at it, because emotion...
it just attaches itself more.
When you encode a memory with emotion, the decay effect is significantly reduced. Yeah. So you remember it a lot longer.
Yeah. So I didn't want to... I just think I find advertising fascinating. The approaches people take.
We should talk about advertising and marketing, because I've done some reading on the father of marketing and propaganda. I think I mentioned it on the show. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Papa Freud. Fun fact.
Oh, oof. All right, cool. I got it down. I'd love to talk about advertising. Like, there's so much that I find fascinating about that, but I didn't want to steer us off too much. I just wanted to mention that real quick as far as the subconscious brain and how different organizations are really just honing into that.
Yeah, they're just really inserting themselves into your subconscious.
Yeah. So conscious brain, 9 bytes of data for 5 seconds, but the subconscious brain, just terabytes and terabytes.
Yeah. And so kind of the kind of culmination of this conversation for me has led to the role behind the ego, the subconscious, right? Your ego, we've defined and described as this function of mortality that has a clear and defined purpose and its limitations. Subconscious, as we have quasi-mathematically proven, is much, much less limited than your ego. And, here we get into the woohoo witchcraft, hippy-dippy, tinfoil hat area.
I mean, we did talk about D&D for like 2 hours last episode, so...
The subconscious is not subject to the ego's vulnerabilities or its aptitude to be persuaded, because the subconscious knows who you are. And this is why some people find meditation to be so powerful and enlightening, because meditation is a way to tap into that subconsciousness and stop thinking with your conscious mind, to stop perceiving the world around you, immediately around you, with your ego mind, and to start experiencing yourself. We talk a lot about experiencing yourself on this show. That's where the subconscious comes in. And if you can tap into that, you'll realize that you're not this mortal physical body. You're more than that. And we talked about this in the identity episode. You're more than what you think you are. Mankind is more than just biological physical beings born to die on this rock in space. Humanity is something so incredibly important to the human experience, and that can't be contained within ego. I mean, we've described and we've explained a couple of different situations and scenarios where the ego can't be trusted to maintain humanity. Yeah. And so that's where the subconscious takes over. When you realize that you're not your ego, and you're not what you think you're not the things in your bowl, you begin to realize that you are irrevocably, undeniably connected to something bigger than this flesh sack that you perceive yourself to be most of the time. And you can feel this connection to the universe. And the subconscious is there to maintain that connection. And I think it's a real tragedy that we've lost that as a society, I think.
When you say lost that, I mean, what do you...
So, I know you don't want to get political. So, we're going to do our best to be general here. But still,
in the last 100 years, I mean, what do you? I mean, is it like? Are you talking about like the world of like instant gratification and all this stuff that we can distract ourselves with, or what do you like? What do you mean when you think that? Do you think that people in the past, at any point in time, or at a certain point in time, were more in touch with their subconscious than we are today?
Yes, but not consciously aware of it.
So how do you, I mean, are you talking like 18th century versus now, or are you talking like BC 10,000?
I don't know. It's been gradual, especially in the modern era. I can't think of the timelines of when modern and postmodern philosophy started. But especially after World War II, so the mid-1900s, it's gotten a lot faster. I mentioned tapping into your subconscious. You can find that connection to the universe. That's not a really good way to put it, but I'm just trying to describe the indescribable. I'm trying to put
hard.
Infinite in a box. I'm trying to.
I just know, but like in the past, I've heard people, they say like, oh, I'd love to live in the medieval era or the Renaissance era or whatever. Mm-hmm. And
that'd be terrible.
Knowing anything about those eras, I'm like, that would be horrifying.
Yeah, all the disease and sickness and
it's like you're already like if you want to live in the medieval era, you're already past the average life expectancy.
Yeah.
You're 35, and that's an accomplishment.
Yeah. Congratulations, Grandpa.
Yeah. And so I was just I'm curious when people say stuff, anything that kind of sounds like that. We're like, oh, it was better in the past. It's like, was it really?
Well, physically, no, but spiritually, yes. I absolutely believe that this connection to the universe that I keep talking about, it's just a connection to God, right? You and I belong to the same church, the same faith, and so like a connection to God or Heavenly Father. That's what I'm talking about here. That's what the subconscious is there for, because you can think and think and think and think until you will never build any faith, really. You might get a little bit. You might be able to, well, I don't even want to say you might be able to rationalize some things because they're not rational. You can't rationalize the divine.
to play devil's advocate, I mean, I've heard a lot of like scientists or doctors. I think it was Albert Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure, but I think Albert Einstein, towards the end of his life, he said like everything he's learned through his life has proved that there is no possibility but a God.
Mm-hmm.
If that like, and so I always find that interesting. Interesting.
I love that quote.
Yeah. And that's not the quote in its exactness, but
right.
I appreciated hearing that from him, and I know other people have shared the same sentiment. It's like some of the things they've experienced in the scientific or medical or research world, like they have had those experiences, and they come out of it knowing that there's no way that there isn't.
Mm-hmm. But I would argue against your point that you can rationalize faith, that there had to be faith there to begin with. And so you can rationalize a little bit and get a little bit of that connection to a higher power, to God. But then again, like, see, as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about how much of that is your conscious mind and how much of that is your subconscious mind feeding info to your conscious mind, right? Because like thinking about something, thinking is a fascinating process.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we can get into however many layers, and I think that he talks about that in the video as well. It's like he challenges you on like how meta do you want to get?
Right.
But I like just to point out real quick, there's obviously there's a lot of people that their faith is different, or even further than that. I've interacted with a lot of folks where their higher power is much more abstract than maybe like our Heavenly Father, or maybe they're agnostic, or maybe they're atheist. But there is still like I would still ask those people that that's their view, as far as if they're there's a connection that they can still feel with whatever, with the world, with the people around them, with nature.
Yes.
Since you and I are in the same faith, we would describe that same thing as Heavenly Father.
Right.
But
right.
I was always fascinated with somebody described, and man, would I love it as far as meditation. But somebody described their experience with meditation as they got to a point where they could like literally, it seemed like they were in a room with a hole, and they could like peer over that hole, and they saw their thoughts going by.
Yeah.
But it was a very like physical experience where like they had themselves and they were physically looking into a room, and their thoughts were just coming and going, and they could see them, but there was absolutely no attachment to them. And this was a person that I trust. I mean, I trusted it. I didn't have any doubt that they were trying to pull one over on me.
Right.
I've heard that experience from multiple people, and I found that fascinating. That seems a lot kind of what you're talking about with meditation and kind of dipping into the subconscious.
Yeah.
I would find that a supremely peaceful experience if I was able to step away from my thoughts for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to experience like what's beyond this flesh bag that we are observing through.
The good old meat sack.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point I was touching on, was that there's each of us individually is part of one big whole, one big spiritual whole. And the tragedy I was talking about in society was that people don't really acknowledge that. And with all of the distractions and the instant gratification and everything, it's hard to get there, right? Because you don't really need to get in touch with yourself anymore to survive. There's other things to do, and there's not really a need to search within yourself to find answers anymore. It's all in your pocket. You can look at a screen to get any answer that you're looking for.
Yeah. And
so this introspection has kind of gone by the wayside, and that's the tragedy I was talking about. That the society has lost this connection to whatever we're trying to talk about. And to go back to your original analogy, the actor in the play, that everything is in your story, right? Everything's in your ego's perceiving all that, but your subconscious is connected to everything else, all the other characters in your play.
Yeah.
And that's how you know that they're there. That's how you know that they're more than just their single characteristic. Does that make sense? You mentioned,
Yeah, I mean, like if somebody were to walk up to me and ask me, like, are they more than just this character trait? Then I would have to, it would have to come up to my conscious brain, and I would acknowledge, like, yeah, they're more than, like, there's probably more to them than the fact that they're just supposed to say this line
right
at this time.
Right.
But, like, yeah, in the moment, in my ego spot, at that level of consciousness, I just recognize them as, like, how they serve me from my vantage point.
Right. But there's a natural knowing there that you're part of, that they're part of you. They're part of your experience.
Yeah. And I would definitely say that, you know, that being present is definitely something that probably for the larger population is not something that is aware, that people are aware of.
Right.
Or have ever experienced.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's part of the tragedy, is that the people don't acknowledge that they're part of something, that they've lost that natural knowing. It's all about the self, and pursuing meaning for the self, and pursuing pleasure for the self, and it's not, you know, there's no acknowledgement that there's something else to you, that you're not just you.
I wanted to just to, you know, try to cover ego, as we're certainly not doing it comprehensively, because I don't have any degree. And I would say that you would probably acknowledge that there's probably somebody somewhere on this earth that knows more about ego than you. So it's not a comprehensive.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But from what I was reading, there was a couple different words that are commonly used and kind of thrown around. But there's ego, which we've discussed as the kind of the conscious decision-making part of our brain. It is the conscious I.
Yeah.
And then there's egocentric, which is my understanding from the it sounded from a previous analogy you gave, it sounded like you and I read the same website. But egocentric is the ignorant view from my vantage point. So I'm looking from where I'm at, and this is what I see at the ego level. There's nothing else. Like there's not additional stuff. And then there's egotistical, which may have been coming up in those times where we were talking about the church talk and some of those other things, where viewing ourselves in a more favorable light.
Yeah.
Would you agree with those?
Yeah.
One of the other things that I wrote down was like driving. I think ego comes up super commonly for a lot of people on the road. And so, like, when I do something wrong, I have an endless list of reasons to pull from, because I acknowledge, like, I'm a person with depth and experience. Yeah. And so I have all these things, and it can be anything from, they were in my blind spot, to, you know, a whole big, like, I'm sleep deprived and I'm starving because I stayed up all night listening to the woes of a friend because I'm such a good person. Yeah. And when I woke up this morning, my family member took my debit card, so I didn't have it when I went to the grocery. And it, like, what the heck? Yeah. It just goes on. And also, when I was writing this, I was entertained by that. When I got done writing that little thing, I was entertained by how quickly it shifted back to the me. Like, I was talking about something I did to somebody else, and most of that was like me statements. Yeah. And like more favorable things that I was doing in a fictional analogy. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah. But
that's the ego, man.
When I see somebody else cut me off at whatever level the ego's at before it gets to the subconscious, their entire identity is the dick who pulled out in front of me on purpose when I was on my way to a meeting I'm late to. Right. And again, it turned quickly back to my stuff because I'm the main character.
Exactly.
And the only purpose that side character served was to get in my way for my important thing. And they're probably smug about it.
Oh, absolutely. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they be?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's called fundamental attribution error. That you just described that perfectly.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it, that's been brought up in the past, and I find that as well just fascinating because it happens so often.
Yeah. You just reduce a whole person down to this one thing that they did.
Yeah.
It's just great stuff. It's great.
Or somebody's late like twice, and they are forever known like they're just the person that's late. And nothing like nothing would ever convince me. You know, if they're just late, who do I care if I ask them and it turns out that both of those times, like, they were dealing with a sick family member. Like, that doesn't matter. They were
because they don't have depth, right?
Yeah, they don't have depth.
Yeah,
They don't have a family member. They're just the side character to my story.
exactly.
So yeah, so egotistical is kind of the description of viewing ourselves in a more favorable light.
Mm-hmm.
Egocentric is the kind of the ignorant view from my vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ego is the conscious I. So those are the three words that I was seeing being described.
Mm-hmm.
Just to cover all those bases. This is a question that maybe you won't have a response to, but in the way that people commonly use the words, do you feel like you struggle or experience one of those three more than the others? Maybe one of those two, because ego, there's not really anything attached to ego. Egocentric or egotistical.
Yeah. Yes. Egocentrism is basically just the concept that you view everything from your own vantage point. So I mean, egocentrism is as fundamental to the human experience as ego itself is, because like we've been talking about this whole time, ego is the conscious mind's perception of self, right? It's a very individual, and it does not have any connection to the outside of your body, basically. Egotistical, that's something that I think we can work on as people, as individuals, and that's where the connection to your subconscious and learning your true identity, I think that's where that comes in. Your subconscious knows your true identity deep down enough. It knows everybody else's true identity also. And so getting in touch with that is what can help with egotisticalism. That sounds weird.
Sounds inappropriate.
Yes, it does. Cut it, please. Cut it right now.
I want to, unless there's any other points you have, I want to wrap up with connecting it to addiction recovery again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember, and off the top of my head, I can't remember maybe the times or the situations that they were used, but I do remember a couple times being challenged on maybe I had an idea, or I had a way that I wanted to do something, or I had a thought process, and I was checked on it by somebody saying, that's your ego talking, or that's your ego getting in your way. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to expound on that, or maybe expand on maybe what times those, you may have checked clients on that, and maybe why, what was going on there?
Yeah, the why is very important there. Like, why did you need to do those things that way? Okay. That's the ego trying to protect you, trying to do its job, by protecting whatever part of you perceived as vulnerable. And so, I mean, yeah, it does tend to get in our way, especially swelled egos. As we know, addicts tend to have swelled egos.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bigger your ego is, the easier it is to get in your way, right? The more power you give it, the more power it's going to have over you.
Can I ask, and maybe this will be maybe a check for myself to see if I'm understanding the message you're trying to get across with ego. Do you feel like one of the reasons that somebody who's dealt with addiction for a long time has a swelled ego is because they have, whether or not it was healthy for them in the long run, they have effectively found a way to solve their problems that didn't involve a spiritual or a healthy connection, and they just had this quote unquote solution that they had found that they could turn to every time to solve their problems and solve their vulnerabilities?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Because the saying goes, it works until it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that implies that it does work for a time, until the consequences of addiction kind of build up and burst forth in such a way that the ego is unable to handle all of it at once.
Yeah, because it was very enlightening to me when the first time that somebody really described that. Yes, in reality, there would be a lot of addictions that wouldn't be like, there are addictions that do literally release hormones or changes chemistry immediately in the brain, and addiction in general would not be nearly as common if it didn't, in the beginning, successfully solve what we were trying to do, which we were trying to cover up emotions, or we were trying to cover up pain.
Mm-hmm.
And it did that, and there wasn't really anything negative afterwards
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning.
Right.
And so it was a quick solution to our problem, and we didn't see, like, there wasn't an immediate consequence that was so big to overcome that solution. And so we had something that worked for us, and it took us, I guess the nature of addiction is it took us too long to figure out that it wasn't all it was hyped up to be.
Right. Right. And then oftentimes it goes for so long without noticing that you're in too deep, right? Like, I can't go back now. This is my life now.
And sometimes it's very quick, but it's already too strong, where somebody
Right.
immediately recognizes that this isn't, like, let's take pornography for example.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody can realize pretty quickly. Even I've heard a lot of stories from people that even at a young age they recognize, like, this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But either it was already, the solution was already powerful enough to overcome that shame, or the consequence still wasn't, like, that wasn't big enough.
Mm-hmm.
The consequence still wasn't big enough to overcome what they thought was the solution to their problem. So that's kind of me describing the same thing three different ways. But the other
That's
thing I would
fine.
also challenge is when I am trying to go through recovery, and I know, somebody's told me connection with others. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes, that's very true.
And that includes a connection with others. That includes a connection with my God, my higher power, whatever word somebody wants to use, and a connection with myself. And so my question is, do you feel like an ego is also in play when I try to, even after being consciously aware, when I try to lean on something else other than the things that I consciously know work for me?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Or when I guess the word that I put down is when I victimize myself to my situation instead of taking actions that I know have worked for me in the past.
Now, what are you asking?
Just, I mean, I can think of times where that has happened. I guess the assumption would be that ego is playing, it just takes up the mantle and brings forth the solution that it had come up with every other time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's its job, right? Because your ego knows that that's protected you in the past, right? It's served that purpose.
Yeah.
Whether it's pornography or alcohol or cocaine or gambling or whatever, right? Like that fixed your problem for a minute, and your ego knows that. And so yeah, that's kind of that's one way to describe addiction. It's kind of a philosophical way to describe addiction. And before we close, we're burning the midnight oil here, almost literally. I want to be really clear about the things that I said about the subconscious and being connected to everything and calling that God. Again, I just want to disclaim and say that I'm trying to describe something infinite with a mortal, imperfect language. My personal faith is aligned with the teachings and doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe in a Heavenly Father and a Savior and Redeemer, Jesus Christ. And I think, I encourage seeking out a connection to whatever you worship through the means that we talked about tonight, because it's there. And it's not just hokum. There's actually plenty of work in psychology right now. Dr. Peterson in Canada is doing a lot of work on, he actually just came out with a book, Dr. Jordan Peterson, 12 More Rules for Life, I think it's called. It's kind of a follow-up to his first book. And it talks about spirituality in the modern era and what the deficits that not being spiritual have brought, and the benefits that it can bring in everybody's life, whether you're religious or not. Being connected to God or nature or a billboard. I heard somebody say was their higher power. that brings real, tangible benefits into your life. And I hope that I didn't scare anybody off when I was describing some of those kooky ideas that I was talking about.
I gave a talk again in church the other day. Prepared it a little bit more than I did in that time that I spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
And the direction that it led me was talking about quote unquote the more. In my time away from the church, I've gotten used to using a lot of words that maybe aren't habitually used in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So I use something I like using weird stuff like the more. I was really entertained by using it. I was also entertained by watching people's weird looks as I kept saying it.
Yes.
And they're like, Jordan, that's the spirit, or that's this, or that's that. I'm like, yeah, but like the more is really entertaining. So, but I described it was a very simple thing of like I get a real connection when in singing, in song, in music. And I just had an experience this year where there was music was playing, and there was a part of the audio. I think it was like a couple. What was it? Part of the song was missing. I didn't know it, but it was either a couple voices or a couple instruments were not being used in that moment. Somebody was looking for like the music or something, and they didn't want to share with the person next to them.
Mm-hmm.
I was none the wiser. Didn't care. I thought it sounded absolutely fantastic without it. But then about 3/4 of the way through, they found what they were looking for, and they joined in on the song. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, like I like this more. Like this is great. Like I didn't know it could sound like this, but I don't want to hear it the other way. So that was just a really does that weird analogy mean anything to you? Does that strike any kind of chord? It just made me ponder. It just made me, when I like sometimes like I could be ignorant and thinking like, oh, the things that I'm doing are great. Like I am happy, or I am this, or I am that, or I am achieving what I want to. But every once in a while I'll just experience something, or I'll just come to a level of awareness that allows me to see like, oh, like that was great, but this is even more, if that makes sense. And so that just kind of came to my mind several times when you were talking about kind of the subconscious brain and kind of this continuing self-actualization that people can have if they work for it in like meditation and everything.
Right.
And if people choose it, if people want to pursue a spiritual connection in whatever way that is for them. So, because I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
So, sorry, I just wanted to.
Yeah,
I just,
you don't know
like,
if you don't know.
I just threw up a bunch of like random stuff. But if that means anything to somebody, it was a very small thing that happened many months ago. But I think about it often. So it was a kind of a cool experience for me to have.
Yeah. And yeah, I thank you for sharing that. That does mean something to me, actually. After you kind of expanded on it a little more. Yes. Yeah. So obviously, don't believe anything we say just because we say it. But if you take anything away from this, just remember you're not who you think you are. You are more, just like Jordan said. And if you want a connection with a higher power, your brain is literally physically wired to seek and find that connection. And it just takes a little work to find it.
And to kind of ground it back with maybe the layman's use of ego. Ego in itself is natural. And
it's a tool.
Yeah, it's natural and it's a tool.
Yeah, it's there to give us information about stuff. And if you're aware of it, you can notice when it says to do stuff that you know is not good. Like in addiction recovery, like your addiction's going to come back up, but you know better, right? And so you say, thanks, ego, but not today.
I like it. So when people say, these things of like egotistical or self-absorbed or overconfident come up, this is just something to ponder on. And so there's stepping fully away from everything related to it may not be something that works for you. And so there are maybe a couple things that could be changed. But ego is not something to step away from. So thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks. Bye.